Filmmaker Magazine presents Back to One with Peter Rinaldi.
Theodore Bouloukos is an actor. He sat down with me on the Upper West Side of Manhattan to talk about the work. Tell me a little bit about your process, your initial process preparing for a role.
For me, it's always in the text. It's right there. And you can just, you pat it sort of, like a ripple effect, stone into water, and it just kind of, you start to really study the speech, and you think about the kind of person who speaks that way. And I have always been, and perhaps because I was a writer too, I am a writer, but I don't practice as a professional writer as I once did. I was always a social observer. And how people perform life fascinates me. And I spend a lot of time, no matter where I am, watching people two people or one person, anything from the way they pick up a fork to watching, say, a group of 5 people in a restaurant. And it's the person who isn't talking, the people who aren't, whom I watch, you know what I mean? Because those interstitial moments before they get to say a word or add something to the conversation, or maybe they just sit very passively, very quietly, and they bring their napkin up to their mouth and they poke at their food and they're kind of listening, or maybe they're taking a drink. But I love to watch the performativity of that whole, of that moment in which they're sort of in my midst, and I study the way the glass is picked up, or if they try to remove the condensation from the water, or I just find those little details utterly fascinating, because it's all part of sort of like the grand collection of human oddities,
Yes.
that we all are guilty of practicing, and we all have these quirks. We could be anywhere. We could be in a playground, and I'll watch the parents who are sort of watching their kid play, but also kind of reading or whatever. And I love to watch people read. I love to see people who are engrossed in a book scratch their nose, you know what I mean, and do this kind of thing. Or they pick at a zit, while they're reading. And or they're a nail biter.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's those moments that
Yeah.
I think are really very, very, very telling about humanity, and I collect them in a kind of inventory of, sort of a mental inventory, and I think about how I want to add to a character and whether or not I want to give them one of those little ticks. A lot of what goes into breaking down a script is sleuthing, is figuring out who this person is, what their motivation is, why they're doing it, what they look like, where they are in their psyche. All of that is very useful to have had a reporting background, because when you're sitting and interviewing people, you're looking at them, play with their hands or whatever, and you're observing all these little, like I said before, the kind of social observation of humanity, but when they're confronting you with having to answer questions and having to let their guard down or what have you, they're doing things to kind of grasp at a memory or whatever, like I am. And those are really interesting moments of observation, and they go into how I think when I read this script aloud. Even before I talk to the director, I'll read it, and then I start to read the dialogue aloud, and I start to play with the dialogue, like the inflections, the emphases, what is the motivation for the scene? Why is this person, okay, in the case of Treasure Trouble, which I'm using as a reference just because it's the next film I'm doing, and I'm fresh from having read the script twice and having met with Dan just Friday. Sunday, I was at Goodwill dressing him, because that's the next step. After I figure out how he's going to be, I think about how he's going to look. And I enjoy morphing with these things, with these characters. I have managed to keep a beard, but I'll tell you, if you need me to shave it, I'm happy to shave it. I've used a mustache. I've gone without any facial hair. I put a rinse in tomorrow. I'll go dark, I'll go blonde, and that's part of the fun of acting, is the dress up. And because once you start to really put the costume on, you start to really feel like it gets you closer to the performance. And really, what you want always is some kind of performance, even when you're saying one line. Because one line can be spat out by anybody, but not everybody can give you a performance with one line. That's, that's about caring too, though. A lot of the sort of mumblecore-ish kind of films, are, I can appreciate a certain degree of naturalness, but I don't know, let's say even if I were younger, whether or not I could roll with some of it. I mean, I can improvise, really. I don't mean this immodestly, but I'm glib. So improvisation is not difficult for me. In fact, I could probably do a whole sketch thing, and I've left people sort of like, But talking is sort of a fort, So I can't say that part bothers me, but I need a little more structure, and I also like a script that has been sort of. I'm very excited about a film I did with Michael Bilandic called Job's World, which will be coming out in November. That Sean Price Williams shot. It's really. I had a really good time making that. I really did, and we did riff a bit. Jason Grisell, who's the star of the film, and I, but not so much that we veered from any of Mike's ideas. I mean, that's really very much intact, and really good improvisation, I think, keeps the flow of that in mind. In other words, like we're going to go this far right now, but we need to hit this, hit that, hit this, and if you're going to improvise, I think you need to be able to know your script well, so that you're at least faithful to most of the lines. In other words, like even if you expand the dialogue a little bit, you've got to make sure that you've spoken the words of the filmmaker, mm-hmm. or whoever wrote the screenwriter. You can pad it or embellish it or whatever around it, but you can't just rewrite it for them. I mean, I have done those kinds of things, and I think it's a little lazy, and I think it's also sort of disrespectful.
And it always runs into trouble.
It does, because only one of you is really going to know how to navigate that.
Right. Right.
I think that part of my process too is really knowing that script cold. Mm-hmm. Because if you're going to improvise, you better, in other words, you don't just put the car in gear and hit 60. You got to know how to you have to upshift to fifth gear. You can't just go from 1 to 5. And you can only do that if you already know the words, and you really have to know the script.
That's a great analogy.
And there is a lot of laziness in independent film, where we're only shooting those scenes tomorrow, so I'll just read them overnight. Yeah, okay. Familiarity is good, but memorization is better. Oh my God, I'm the worst memorizer. I have to work like a dog to get it up in here. It's crazy, because in fact, the fact that I am a word person really interferes. And my natural syntax, always interjects. Oh yeah. I gotta remember the order of the words, because it's typically I would say something. I mean, I'd have to look at something and tell you how I would say it just a little differently.
Yeah.
But it is almost, it could be a problem if I don't reel it in.
Right.
So I have to really learn it as written, and that also helps though with getting rid of the me, so that the character can live, right? Because it's not about me saying it; it's about me being so and so saying it. And then I think rehearsals are very important to film, and I think sometimes they're given short shrift. And that's really too bad, because I really do think you can work out a lot of not just the blocking, but the relationship between your scene partner and you know, and how you're going to engage with one another. But, you know, it's always budget that determines these things, right? They've got, you know, they want to shoot a feature film in 11 days. When are you going to rehearse? You know, I mean, unless you take it upon yourself to get together with your scene partner and do those things, but it rarely happens. So you end up sort of rehearsing before you do the takes. And sometimes if you're really on top of things with your scene partner, and you're lucky that you're working with an actor who's really committed like that, you might even film it, you know, because I'm not talking about, like, you know, let's run lines. I'm talking about, like, let's do it, you know, as we're rehearsing it, just to get comfortable with it. But sometimes, you know, you end up with somebody who's really smart actor who you know, makes you play better as a performer, and you can shoot that. You hope they're actually shooting some of those rehearsals too, because they're worthy takes. And of course, I love design. I love typography. That's it's a little bit of a weakness of mine, is that I'm a font freak. I from the time I was a child, I was saving household products because I was just completely absorbed by the idea that the Peter Pan jar would update itself, and they'd move the logo, or they'd change it, or the Joy bottle, you know, added lemon so it went from white to yellow. And, you know, the lemonization of household products in 1972 was one of the great years of my life. Are you kidding? Oh my God. It was just, and my mother was just like, what are we doing with these boxes of empty household products, which I meticulously cleaned out and preserved, and I'd line them all up, you know, so I'd look at, like, the new Pepsi logo and compare the orange crush bottle of yore to the new one, and I'd just stare at the designs of these things. I was just fascinated with it. And also, I would discover later on that I cared about industrial design, because I remember when we updated, like, the Smith Corona, and it was sleeker, and I was just like, oh no, don't throw out the old one, you know, because I want to look at them, you know. And my mother would be like, what are you doing? I'm studying them. And you're studying the typewriter? Are you going to use them? No, I'm noticing that they move the keys, and it's flatter here, and the bobbin is like. And my mother was like, why aren't you like a normal, like, 8-year-old? Go outside and play kickball. I will, but first I'm looking at typewriter. You know, I mean, I was just a kind of an odd person. When I was 10, I had a fascination, after my grandmother died, with coffin design. And we had like an au pair one summer, like a babysitter who was basically taking care of us most days. And we'd zip around in her little red Beetle, and I said, please, you've got to take me to Albany Casket Company. I've got to see how they make coffins. And she was just like, I can't be an accomplice to this. No, we have to ask your parents. And my parents were like, oh, they won't let him in. Just go, you know, like, well, sure, they sure did. They let me in. They thought it was the craziest thing. Years later, at 14, I was writing to department stores all across the country to ask them to open a branch in Albany. And I get, like, letters back from Marshall Fields and Ellis Ayres and Rich's in Atlanta and Bamberger's in New Jersey. And I mean, like, all the storied great American department store nameplates that are now completely absorbed into Macy's as a, you know. And I'd get the craziest letters, like, from B. Altman and Company, like, what an unusual preoccupation for a 14-year-old boy. Our current expansion plans do not include the Albany Metro Market. I was like, Albany has a Metro Market? Oh, I guess it does. All I knew was we had one department store, and it was a Macy's. Now, it was, to be fair, the best performing Macy's outside of Herald Square was Macy's Colony. So it was a huge, and when LL Bean opened its first brick and mortar outside of Maine, they opened in Albany, because LL Bean in the Capital Region was comprised of the biggest population of mail order customers. So I was, just, I had these odd interests, and I was a big reader. I was a serious reader. I was just a reader from a very early age. And so books were a way to kind of travel for me, But I always paid attention to the characters. And it was true too with film, because my parents loved movies, and Albany didn't offer a great deal in the way of a lot of entertainment, but we did manage to have movies maybe 2 months later than when they were released in New York, and they saw everything. And by the time I was 12, I think my parents would just take me along, because I was dying to see a lot of these films, because I spent every Sunday with the arts and leisure section looking at the full page ads that most films took out. You might remember, it was Young Frankenstein, it would be a full page. Shampoo, full page, Freebie and the Bean, full page, All of the President's Men, full page. And like by the time you got to the articles, they were like on page 35 of what was a thick advertising-filled arts and leisure section. So, I saw The Exorcist here, and it was what fascinated me about New York theaters was the fact that the logo of the film was on the marquee, whereas in Albany, letters were tacked up. But here, the marquees boasted the actual advertising, marketing materials the film used, from the logo to everything was a replication of the ad. I couldn't get over that. Oh my God. You didn't just get All the President's Men, the logo, but there were like the billboard, Dustin Hoffman and Robert Redford, one-dimensionally pasted onto the marquee that usually looked like a V, or perhaps it was a square. But it was just fascinating to me. I saw how the poster spoke to the tone of the film, okay, which gave me a sense of what I was about to see. Yeah. And then I studied not just the principal actors, but a lot of the smaller roles fascinated me, especially because I came of age at a time, and I was just saying this last night, we were watching Endeavour on BBC. And it's something that I still admire about British actors, and that is that the smaller roles go to actors who are not just randomly cast the way American films do. They just sort of like, oh yeah, we've got that scene with the guy who's got, the hot dog vendor or whatever, like they put their friends in. No. The smaller roles are occupied by actors who are who are at the same level as the principals. And that makes a huge difference. Yeah. Because the tiny performance that gets written off here doesn't get written off over there. And that's because they work as actors for a lifetime, as working actors, without this like carrot of celebrity, kind of trying to seduce them from what should be the purpose and the commitment to craft. So I noticed those actors, and those actors informed me in a lot of ways. I owe John McGivern and Mary Wicks and a whole host of a lot of actors who were TV support, guest starring actors on television shows, especially sitcoms. There was a rotation of the same people all the time. Bewitched used a lot of the same people. But they were all good though. Yeah. They were good actors. And I was fascinated by them. And I think the character actor, you could argue that all actors are character actors, but the character actor, the sort of the supporting banana, was always more interesting to me than the lead. I had such reverence for the craft that I thought, how does one just become an actor? If you haven't gone to Juilliard, or you haven't, in other words, like I'm very formal in that way. I respect the institutions that support a career and develop people, and one doesn't just decide to do something. Well, it turns out one can. It depends on, one's sincerity and seriousness of purpose, and how great and how greatly ignited that passion is, that one will basically transform himself and be an apprentice to many masters, who will be a perennial student to those who know more or better, and that's how I look at this business. It's something I think we as actors continue to refine and ennoble ourselves with experience and with a degree of education and openness to be enlightened by others who have something to help enhance us, and I'm a sponge that way. Anything that can make me a better actor is something I'm interested in learning, and I think it's one of the great professions where the job is never done. One of my other little obsessions was that I was fascinated with TV logos for the channel, and also set design, TV news set design. Just fascinated with the 3 stations, because we only had 3 networks, but one of them was owned by GE, so they had money. So they always looked like Channel 4 in New York. They were the NBC station. Okay, they would later switch affiliation to CBS. But the other 2, the ABC station was pathetic, okay? But so was ABC up until Happy Days. It was always in the ratings basement. The CBS station was local yokel, and always had bad design sets because their anchors were pure corn. They were so Albany. They were provincial. They had no style. They just, it was before sort of the internet would make everybody kind of look alike, and you didn't need to have local stores because you could order anything online, and so you could be just as chic in Schenectady as you are in Milano. You know what I mean? Nowadays, it doesn't matter. Geography doesn't determine who you are. But in those days, when we had only network television, and HBO was just a glimmer in somebody's cable system, and not ours, we would get cable, and 9, 11, and 5 would come, the independent stations from New York, and you'd see the real contrast. But I was fascinated with the TV set design, and in fact, I subscribe to a blog now that chronicles who's getting a new set. Like, oh yeah, like they did this whole thing on the World Cup and the sets over in Russia. Who supplies the lighting and the set design and the whole thing. That's a total. You buy packages of these things, and all you do is slap a 6 on it or something, but you change it up a little bit. I mean, but they'll do like the new, Channel 7 in San Diego's brand new set, and I just pour over that shit like, oh my God, that's like manna from heaven for me. When that email comes, I'm just like, leave me alone for the next hour or 2. I'm checking out new sets. I'm like a pig in shit. I'm not kidding you. We went on a school trip to Channel 13, which was the ABC affiliate. They were the bottom of the barrel. But I sat behind that anchor desk and I swore I wanted to be an anchor, a TV anchor. I thought, could there be a more glamorous life? Oh my God. And most of my friends were like, why are you drawing the CBS eye on desks? Because I was just, because the other thing I loved about network television, which is why the film network resonated with me too, because I was just, I thought from being a news anchor, what I really want to do was work at CBS and write and go into programming, develop TV shows, because I just loved television, and I loved the variety of television. I loved variety shows. I loved mystery shows. I liked the whodunit, like the Columbos and all that kind of thing. I liked Murder, She Wrote. I love the concept for the Love Boat. The Love Boat's genius. It's genius. Okay, Come on. First of all, what bad possible thing could happen? Oh yeah, maybe once in a while somebody would steal some jewelry or something, but you're on a luxury cruise, and it's a great opportunity to cast all of these has-beens who are not really has-beens to people
Right.
who once were, looked at them as being legitimate. I mean, I really think it's a rotten thing that we don't have vehicles anymore for actors who sort of fall out of favor. They end up on reality shows.
Or
Those
Dancing
poor
with the
things.
Stars,
Yeah, that's so humiliating. They're kind of like singing for their supper.
Yeah.
But the Love Boat, my God, I would do a Love Boat in a second. Are you kidding me? What an honor that would be. What happened for me was that I was writing about art in a very frivolous way. Mostly, I was writing for sort of society magazines, and I was covering sort of like auction market and that, the people who attend and that sort of stuff, and parties and but I also was very active with the young friends of the young patrons of the Royal Academy of Art in London, which was a very sort of Upper East Side young socialite group. And I was the co-chair, and I was trying to make this thing much more intellectual, and everybody else wanted to just get drunk and find a husband. But I was interested in actually bringing people from the RA who happen to be in the United States and letting them talk. And I put 2 panels together that were really quite good. One the New York Times did on British pop art versus American pop art. And I started to, through not just through the RA, but I always followed the art world. So I was always going to openings and things. This one painter I met, actually, he was really funny. He and I were both at this show of an RA, Royal Academician, who was young, and he had this very conceptual show. And we went outside, both of us, and sort of found ourselves having a cigarette and shaking our head. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and I said, hi. And he said, oh, what do you think? And I said, you want to know what I think? I thought, and I'd been reading all kinds of, I was very vested in the theory of conceptual art and 20th century art. And I studied with Rosalind Krauss and Benjamin Buchloh and people like that who, the October magazine set, Jonathan Crary, great people. And I love theory, but I was crying for representational art. I wanted to see a good painter. And of course, in the 90s here, it was just like figuration was still a no-no. Now, of course, everybody's like, oh, the return of painting. It's like return. There were great people all the time. In fact, I developed a very close friendship with the late Paul Cadmus, who was 96 when he died and was painting against the trends of what was, abstract expressionism and people like Clement Greenberg and all the other people who wrote him off. And there he was still painting, figuratively. And, so this guy who's having a cigarette, he's like, well, actually, I'm a painter. Oh yeah, well, come by. I'd love to show you my stuff. So Miguel Treyes, he invites me to his studio and he sort of asks me if I want to model for him. And I said, hell yeah. I mean, I was he's like, I'm not talking about a photograph. I need you to come on Saturdays and give me 2-3 hours. And I said, I understand the procedure. No, I realize, most people don't have the patience for it, but I love it. And I don't know how we got taught. We maybe were smoking some grass and drinking some very good Puerto Rican rum. And, and I said, well, what do you got in mind with this portrait? What are you going to paint me nude? And, or something like that, and he said, actually, I think that'd be really cool if you'd be into it. I said, no, the world does not need that. And I don't know. Next thing I knew, we had a date for the following or the 2 Saturdays later, and I brought a robe with me, which I dropped, and he did a succession of nudes, one of which he gave me as a sort of payment, hangs in my living room. He had a studio that my brother rented. He lent my brother his studio to throw a birthday party one night. And a really good friend, my brother's best friend from Sarah Lawrence, her younger sister came with her then boyfriend, who was the artist Brock Enright, who remains a very good friend of mine. Very, very close friend. Brock really, I mean, I gotta tip my hat to Brock, because he's sort of my Svengali. You know what I mean? He said, "I'm gonna make you a star." You know, Brock is famous for those kinds of things. You know, like, yeah, okay. And I started working with him, and we started making video art pieces, some crazy things. I mean, like really little lurid things. And I don't, know how much you want me to tell you about that.
Well, one thing I want to know about that is what exactly was it all improvisation, or was some of it coming from you? Was he letting you go?
Completely me letting go, absolutely.
And how was he like guiding it?
Yeah,
or
he was sort of guiding it in terms of like the premise, but we were very much, freestyling.
Was this cathartic for you? Like, or was
In
it?
a lot
Was
of
it
ways,
like?
it was. It's funny you should say that, Peter. It was. I always felt like somebody who was very much a free spirit, but who was kind of. I was restrained by the dictates of polite society and, sort of a very traditional upbringing and a prep school and, just like I was yearning to just be me. And I think I found crazy outlets and obsessions that I knew other people didn't share, and partly I was glad of that because they were places I could be me, caring about, typography or news sets or, department store logos. I mean, these things mattered to me in a way I really couldn't share with other people because they either thought I was nuts or I was just, peculiar. I was too peculiar for a lot of people. And I think with Brock, I was sort of like, I think he recognized that there was a peculiarity to me, but he was there to celebrate it, not denigrate me or try to restrain me in some way. So I wasn't. I mean, I'm not saying anybody physically restrained me. I mean the constraints of sort of being a gentleman. And being a productive member of society. I was always captivated by people who were libertines and free spirits and, who had a certain degree of uprightness, because I think good manners are always essential, but who were going to be who they wanted to be. And didn't live their lives according to the conduct dictates of other people. I'm not advocating the robbing of a bank here. I'm not saying go molest a child. I'm not, this isn't chaos and anarchy. I'm just talking about just, let your freak flag fly. I mean, like, just be you. I was enlivened by doing the work I was doing with Brock, and then I another artist would ask me to do some maybe an auditory kind of performance. So I would do a voiceover, read this that would end up being laid on the track of some visual thing, and that would be in a gallery. And I was building a CV of art world projects. Now it's huge. I mean, like, I can't get over because anything I was attached to went on that CV. And in the beginning, it was all just one big soup. But then I realized that I really did enjoy the camera, and I migrated. I knew one thing. I knew how to write dialogue, so I knew how to read dialogue. So when I would go into a cold audition, I would give them something. It might not be what they wanted, but they were never going to get, shut the door, please. They were going to get color and some design on the character that, like I said, it might not be in sync with what they thought who the character was, but it was certainly a take on the character. It wasn't just some bland beige, offering. And then I used the tools I have. I'm a good communicator. I write well. I think that I can grasp the characterization fairly quickly. I would learn to take direction well. And then I made about 50 student shorts. So I'm still doing the art world stuff, but I'm also trying to develop a career as an actor. Well, okay, I don't have time or money to enroll at HB Studio. And so by doing a lot of short films, especially student films, I was learning my way around a set. I didn't necessarily like what I was doing. I didn't necessarily like the role, but I figured I needed to get a reel. If I do as many of these as I can, I'll probably end up with at least 3 parts that are passably worth the, the time of a casting director or somebody much more substantial in the industry who will give me another chance at the next level. And that's what I did. And then I graduated myself to features. And I've just kept working. At times it's been, I haven't been as discriminating as I would have liked to because there wasn't enough sort of editorial work around, and I'd have to do a production, do some silly commercial for a credit card theft or Snap-on Smile. I mean, I've done so many things that are just absolutely ludicrously funny. And I look at some actors' trajectories who have just almost a pedigree kind of CV that I would give my eye teeth for, which is very funny because I am actually somebody who cares about that kind of formality and having the right things and knowing the right people and that I should also be, but that I should be somebody who had the most democratic and populist and really and not have the CV that's the cultivated. I think it's moving more toward that now because I seek out certain types of people and I'm not doing the gluttonous amount of work I used to. But it's just funny to me that but it all boils down to availability and what I'm right for and what there was that offered me a chance to try and realize a character and be part of the story. And some people took chances and other people, don't see me as worthwhile. So, and that's true of every actor. There are some who are going to be dismissed out of hand and others who somebody sees a kernel of something and they say, all right, I can see him doing this.
Yeah.
A lot of who I am as an actor is fed by a lot of these interests. And they are things that I kind of, I don't know if I use them so much as I use this aggregate education that I gave myself in obsessions and buffdom to find what I think are the quirks of a character. Not that I play to the quirk, but that I have to kind of know a bit about them as a backstory. You know what I mean? I think a lot of actors create a backstory. I'm not so interested in whether or not they, use the post office down the street versus the one 2 blocks away. I don't care where they buy their groceries necessarily, but I care that, that they're the type of people who, might pick their nose and pretend nobody's looking, or that nobody saw what they did. More about the idiosyncrasies of people. I think that's what I'm getting at. The idiosyncrasies are the more interesting thing to me than whether or not they like Arnold bread versus Pepperidge Farm. I think early on, before I could articulate it, I was aware of the sort of the trope of high and low culture, and that each had significance. I remember we lived near a professor from the university who was also the head flutist in the Albany Symphony Orchestra, and he taught music at State University of New York at Albany. And they had a lot of what were, professorial, academic friends, And that was an era when for academics, owning TV was completely verboten.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That was low culture. which is odd because TV actually began as a very much a high culture instrument. You look at Playhouse 90, you look at the origins of TV programming in New York, and they were all, I mean, the aims were the BBC. It was not the direct that it would become out in Hollywood. That would come later. But the idea of television was like low. And I remember thinking that was an odd snobbery because there was public television, certainly. My mother would get up and do yoga with Lilius Yoga and You. And she was also, my mother was learning German from public television. She had the albums, Wir lernen Deutsch. And it was, she'd watch the program and she'd be, we'd be very quietly watching her like recite the words with the TV. And then she'd have her homework, which were on these LPs, just, like classical albums came in LPs that they were almost like a box set and there would be multiple vinyl inside. I don't know, I just thought TV was fascinating to me, and so I remember that was like a red flag that went up as a child, like, why? They don't like television. And then later I would learn that was considered like sort of unsophisticated, and that sort of thing. And so I started to really sharpen my own eye for what was, for basically what was considered kitsch and what was considered art, and I didn't understand at first why some things were dismissed and some things were elevated. And then of course with education I understood that, that the canon of art included these painters, but in the 70s, art was still, like Jackson Pollock and the abstract expressionists, sort of were pretty canonical by that point. But, there was new work that was happening, female artists, that really, really ignited my interest in the art world because it was becoming much more politicized and the voices were many more than white men. And photography. I remember reading on photography Susan Sontag when I was a teenager, and I thought it was the craziest idea, and I love pictures because we always had Kodak and Stamatics, and my father always had a movie camera and all that kind of thing. But I remember thinking that she gave a scholarship to this art form I sort of took for granted with Polaroids and things like that, and that absolutely photography had replaced painting as a 20th century art form. That there was something to the idea that we controlled, that we could manipulate the moment, we could set up, this document, this record of our lives. And I was just blown away by that. And so I really got into sort of studying photography and photographers and looking at photography as art when most of the art historian was yet to acknowledge the inclusion of photography. But I also saw how it could be used seductively for advertising. That photography, could be this highfalutin thing that Susan Sontag was writing about, but more importantly and more directly, it was coming to us through advertising. And it was advertising that was really intriguing to me. Right now, I love TV, and what I love most about it, TV, apart from like the theme songs and the jingles, it wasn't so much the serial format of the series, because they were much more predictable, and they always ended well. Even the dramas, everybody tied everything up in a bow. Columbo always got his man, But it was the commercials that were so important, and actors who appeared in commercials, who also appeared in TV series, intrigued me. I was starting to figure out, like 10, 11, that this was a profession that, you weren't just, you could do a commercial for Volkswagen, but you would also end up on Laughing, you know, and isn't that amazing? And to me, that was like a Disneyland for me, you know, going into the box. And so those were the early moments of wanting to be an actor, to do what they did. And then having parents who loved film and good film. I mean, my mother took me to see The Passenger when I was like 12, 13, you know, and I remember wanting desperately to see Deep Throat because it was an X film, but X films at the time were still done on 35 and they were just adult films. And we had a theater in town called the Petite Cine, and they showed, you know, I Am Curious Yellow and all the, you know, the great titles. Digital would kill pornography because anybody could become a pornographer, just like everybody became a filmmaker, which also enabled me to become an actor, because when everybody could become a filmmaker, that gave me a chance to become an actor in a way that wasn't so hierarchical and hegemonic as it had been in the past, where you came out of a drama school or blah, 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 you know? It was a great liberator, digital, the digital medium.
But was this because you just wanted to be a product in this thing you were fascinated with?
Yeah, I mean, I sometimes wonder, like, at what point I sort of allowed myself to let myself go and be kind of a character. You know, the people would say, oh, you know, he's such a character. And I think everybody's a character, but not everybody's willing to really take the mask off. I don't know. I mean, I could get very maudlin about the whole thing and say that after my father died, and he died tragically in a car accident when I was 17, and I won't go too into it because it's, you know, I don't want to veer us into that. But I will say that if any good came of it, and I can't even use that word, if anything came of it that was productive, it's that it emancipated me in a lot of ways from probably a more conscripted life. And part of my grief led to a kind of not caring anymore about anything and not assigning value to any institutional belief or propriety, a sense of propriety. What was propriety? That shattering, that refusal to elevate these things, to pedestalize them, if you will, to give them ballast, enabled me to just kind of freely be, and not in a way that like I'm, you know, the most together person, because I'm not, but to sort of remove the artifice that a lot of us sort of live with, you know, and not cling to it so needfully, and just sort of see what happens, you know. And I think that fed into just a willingness, because I'll tell you something, I was never somebody who could get up in front of an audience and speak publicly. It would be the death of me. I was so frightened by that prospect, because the idea that anybody would look at me or see me or whatever, or pay attention to what I was saying, and what if they could see that I was going to flub the next line and blah, blah, blah. And when you learn to just let go of that and not give a shit, don't worry about what the camera picks up, how you look on film, who cares? I'm wandering around in a Speedo in one of my early features on a yacht. Yeah, talk about balls. I mean, I guess you can't act if you're worried about how you look. You can't worry about that. And I know that people, you know, get sidetracked by these ideas of what Hollywood does, and, you know, actors say, well, this is my good side, this and that. No, there's no good side is the side that delivers the performance. If you can't be free to do that, then you don't have a good side. You're useless as far as I'm concerned. And I've worked with actors like that. They're just, they're the death of a picture, you know? Having to sort of cater to their vanity.
Yeah.
Fuck that, man. This isn't a vain business. It looks like it is because our picture's everywhere. But it's not if you really get down to it.
Right.
You gotta, you know, there are no idols here. You've got to get down and dirty. How else are you going to act the scene? How else are you going to be this person? You can't worry about like what you're wearing or how it looks on you. Fuck that. It doesn't matter what you're learning in a class or from other actors. If you're not willing to go there yourself, you gotta drop the veil. You just gotta give it everything. I don't know. I mean, not everything is, you know, not every role is Streetcar, but you know, or Biff Loman or something. But the point is, or moreover Willie Loman. But the point is, you gotta be willing to let yourself be this canvas that somebody else is gonna paint on. It's hard, and I struggle with things like that too sometimes. But then I remind myself the reason we're here is to tell a story. And the only way you can really tell it honestly and faithfully is to just jump in the pool and get wet. You are always working at getting a little bit better at something and learning something that can help you get a little bit better. So I don't see myself as being, I see myself as being competent and needing to be as competent, if not more so, out of respect to the director who cast me and to the production itself of whom I'm part. However, that isn't something, you're right, that is a universally held sentiment among actors, some of whom are blatantly careerist, some of whom are not willing, say, to give you your eye line because we're shooting their POV, so they're not in the scene as far as they're concerned. So, now I go back to where I was sitting, even though I'm wrapped, because you were talking to me and we're doing your coverage right now. And yeah, you could have that PA sit there and give you a human, but that's not the person you did the scene with. So I think it's incumbent upon the actor who's already been shot out, who's wrapped, to not run to Crafty quite so quickly, or out for the cigarette. And not, believe me, I love to have a smoke in between things, scenes, etc. And just take the 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever it requires to give that other actor his due. It's a courtesy, it's a professional courtesy, it's something I would want. Not all actors do that. Some actors complain when we have to take, do an 18th take. So, I have been guilty of doing some of that myself. Sometimes because I see it as stupidity. It's the stupidity of the director who didn't, storyboard the scene to begin with, and is suddenly discovering the room like he's an explorer. I get pissed off at that. You talk about like other actors who don't do their homework. I get pissed when the director and the crew don't quite do theirs. That also pisses me off. And I'll tell you something. Now I'm very much somebody who really, really tries to cover his butt, because if you're going to complain about another person, you'd better make sure you know your shit inside and out. Otherwise, they're just having an off day, just like you can be. We have to be fair. But I try to be, open to the fact that some people, arrive at their work differently than I do. And I recognize a lot of actors just focus the night before or 2 days before on what the upcoming scenes are for that given day. But the fact is, you really gotta be familiar with the whole script, really, really familiar, because even if you have the luxury of a production schedule and you kind of know, like we're shooting this, and this is never shot sequentially, okay, but, yeah, shit happens. And it forces you to sort of reveal what you know or don't know. We lost the location, so we're doing this today. I know you thought it was Friday, but it's today, So, okay, I will always feel like, okay, well, let's just rehearse it a few times. Because believe me, if you're familiar with it and you don't quite know it, if you rehearse it 5, 6 times, believe me, once you do, you're walking through that. And then you got to remember all the other stuff that you've got. It's not just remembering the lines. It's remembering that when you came in, you picked up the cell phone. You looked at this while somebody was questioning you, and you were thinking, God, I don't want to be questioned like this. And the minute you lost your cool, you put it down like that, and then you deliver the line. Mm-hmm. But you got to remember that entire sequence, because if you start to like pick things up, you better remember when you picked them up, how you picked them up, and what you said after you did that, because now you got to repeat it, or you're some editor's effing nightmare, you know? He knows, he's edited film. I met Charlie making Bag Boy Lover Boy. It's a favorite of my films, I've got to say this. I loved it because it was one of the happiest sets I ever worked on. Mm. It was in Soho, and every day I went to that set, I swear to God, I couldn't wait to get down there. The 6 train couldn't take me to Spring Street fast enough. I'd wake up really early, look over the scenes we were going to do that day, and I couldn't wait to see these fucking people. I mean, I just loved making that movie.
I guess that matters, huh? I mean,
oh my God, are you kidding me? Having been on the other kind, yeah, in a big way. Oh my God. I have been on some horrific sets. I'm telling you that I just absolutely could not wait for it to end.
Does it literally affect your actual work?
Yes, it does. Mm. Yes, it does. In some cases, when you feel like you don't have one friend on the set and you are really, really just desperate to go home,
yeah.
You start to, I don't know, I'm thinking of a couple of experiences, and they were both out of state. And I think in one instance, I just defiantly decided that I didn't give a shit. This is what I'm doing, this is what you're getting, and if you don't like it, go fuck yourself, okay? Fire me. We were too into the thing too. But I never would compromise the portrayal to cut my nose to spite my face kind of thing. No. Number one, that's completely bad form. It's completely unprofessional. That's not what I'm talking about. You don't do that to the movie and to all of the people who have come together to make this thing. No, what you do is you refuse to yield to your choices, okay? And you are going to do what you're going to do, and if he says, I want this, you say, okay, fine, I'll give you that, and you give him that. But you realize that the real intensity that you give are the things you know the character should have at that moment, and let him in the editing room see the distinction. And if he's too stupid to see that, and I don't know, maybe he was, that's not my problem, because I didn't stint on anything. I just decided to apprehend the direction of my character from somebody who's not treating me very well.
I think there are people that are already fans of yours.
Really?
And yes, and people that are going to be fans of yours. And I'm talking about people that make films and are thinking about, they're trying to think of things to put you in. Talk to those people right now and say, if somebody wanted to make a film for you, what would be the ideal thing for you?
I can't play, I don't think, conventional people. I'm drawn to people who are naturally slightly even transgressive. They don't have to be like full-on pervert, subversion freaks. I mean, like, you know, but I am interested in playing some of those types of people, because I actually am very, I'm sort of intellectually subversive. You know, I'm interested in writings that were considered, you know, anything that Olympia Press would have published, like in the 60s. Mm-hmm. You know, I can't believe that Nabokov was ever like censored. You know, it's just shocking to me. But I don't, you know, like bondage and discipline and all that. I was having a talk with somebody about that. Like, to me, that's just like, I don't know how people can have those fetishes. I don't get it. Maybe because like I get enough theatricality in my professional life that the idea of getting tied up and smacked, I hate pain. I wanted to play rugby for the longest time. But like the idea of like getting smacked was just like, that part I don't love, you know?
Yeah.
I hate pain. I stubbed my toe and I'm a huge baby about the whole thing, you know? But I like playing roles that are racy and that are stuff that other people wouldn't go near because they worry about, you know, like, will it affect my career? I think, my God, if it does, then I don't want to work with you. Like, if you would judge me for playing a leather daddy, you know, then we have no reason to be working together. None. We're not artistically, aesthetically, in any way simpatico. You know, I don't think I have to do the most, you know, completely lurid things on camera, but I always admired people like Charlotte Rampling, who were willing to go there, even as she privately, as we saw in the documentary, lives a very sort of modest, lovely life, she doesn't hang out with actors, so that's a huge thing for me too. I don't really, you know, most of my friends are writers and scientists and that sort of thing. I don't know socially a lot of actors. Of those I have met, I like quite a lot. But I don't live in that Brooklyn world, you know what I mean? Which may or may not help me. It's a little incestuous, but I've been in New York longer than most of those people. So my New York is Manhattan.
Yeah.
I enjoy a lot of those events when I go to BAM or whatever, and I see a lot of those people. But, you know, I don't really hang around with that crowd, and I probably would stand to gain something from doing so. But I mean, I would like to work with directors who are you know, a little more notably expressive as signature filmmakers. Yeah, I would, because I'm intellectual by nature, and I want to work with like minds. I mean, Javier Dolan I would give my eye teeth to work for him. Gaspar Noé, absolutely. Johanna Haag, who happens to be my very dear friend Claire and Skip's first cousin. Johanna Haag has made small pictures in the sense that they are usually some lovely, you know, sort of bourgeois English family on holiday in Italy or someplace like that, you know, and they're very, very talky, because I like talk, and I like to talk to other people who have interesting things to say, and that's what happens when I'm with my friends, you know, and scenes of real life in which the sort of you know, the moments of petty jealousies and weird resentments and all the kinds of things that families are replete with, and close friends too, and when they're on holiday under one roof and, you know, sort of straining to tolerate, you know, the duration of time together. Yeah, I find stuff like that very interesting. I don't find a blockbuster movie, a superhero movie, interesting, because I was not a kid who read comic books. I read Jack and Jill magazine, which I got at school. I went straight to Mad by the age of 9. By 12, I was a National Lampoon reader. That was it. I mean, I liked sophisticated humor. My parents took me to see, you know, like that kind of Borscht Belt, comedic, you know, stand-up type, you know, theater in the round comics who would open for, you know, like some crooner. But I liked crooners. I liked Corbett Monica opening for Perry Como. I was like an old soul. You know, I liked old fart music. I still do. I love big band era music. Like if I find like a station on the internet, like listen to Rosemary Clooney and those. These are like songs that predate me 20 years from my birth. But I love that kind of thing. I love the elegance of that era. Men in black tie going to dinner and the store club. And, you know, I love that kind of formality. And I love that kind of like sophistication. So I like characters who are imbued with that sensibility, but I would love to play somebody who's a, you know, a hobo, you know, a stowaway, who's had to live by his wits, somebody who's a street hustler, a kind of a, yeah, I mean, I like interesting people who have textured lives. No, I don't want to play somebody's dad who's mowing a lawn, unless the dad who's mowing the lawn climbs up into the treehouse and gropes the kid's friend. Then I'm interested in him. Or he's got a little coke habit in the garage. Or he jerks off on the garbage pails. Then I want to know him. Yeah, I'm not interested in daddy, you know, doing gardening, unless he's stooping the gardener. Then it's fun. Then let's see it happen. You know what I mean? Help me water my peonies.
Theodore Bouloukos, thank you so much for this.
Well, thank you for having me. Are you kidding? I'm delighted.
Back to One is a production of Filmmaker Magazine, which is a publication of IFP, the Independent Filmmaker Project.